morning, good afternoon, and good evening, wherever you are in the world. My name is Kasia Lech, and I'm hosting today's Transmedia Arts Seminar brought to you by the combined efforts of the Mahindra Humanities Center and Meta Lab at Harvard University, and chaired by Magda Romańska and Hannah Warden. Today's speaker is Sarah ELLIS, an award-winning producer currently working as Director of Digital Development for the Royal Shakespeare Company. The latest partnership for the RSSC is the Audience of the Future Live Performance Demonstrator funded by the Innovate UK, a consortium consisting of arts organizations, research partners, and technology companies to explore the future of performances and real-time immersive experiences. In 2017, she became a fellow of the University of Worcester for her work in the arts and technology. In 2016, she was awarded by the Hospital Club and Creative Industries Award for cross-industry collaboration for her work on the Royal Shakespeare Company's The Tempest, in collaboration with Intel and in association with the Imaginarium Studios. In 2013, she was listed in the top 100 most influential people working in gaming and technology by the Hospital Club and Guardian Culture Professionals. In partnership with Google, she produced Midsummer Night's Dreaming, winning 2 Lovie Awards for innovation and experimentation. She commits to the development of the arts and technology sector by being a mentor and advisor to programs such as the Sundance Institute's New Frontier Labs, Creative XR program supported by Arts Council England, and Digital Catapult and CPH Labs. Sarah is a regular speaker and commentator on digital arts practice, as well as an industry champion for the Creative Industries Policy and Evidence Center, which helps inform academic research on the creative industries to lead to better policies for the sector. She has been appointed chair of the digital agency The Space, established by Arts Council England and the BBC to help promote digital engagement across the arts. Sarah's talk title is Transmedia, Technology and the Future of Theatre. Welcome, Sarah. It's such an honor.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. I'm going to share some videos. I'm going to share some of the projects we've done, but also talk about the ideas that compel us now in the world of theatre and in the world of technology. And I think it's really, really poignant in this moment to think about technology, because we've had to use technology to find new connection points over the past nearly 2 years in what we've experienced in the pandemic. But we've been working with technology for hundreds of years, and artists have always innovated. But there is a beautiful quote by Norbert Weiner to start this off, which is, to be successful in this world, either the engineers must become poets, or the poets must become engineers. And I want to think about that all the way through in the next hour of how we need to empathize with each other and think about problems from different perspectives. The work I'm going to share with you spans from probably around 2016, when it was the 400th anniversary of Shakespeare's death. And in that year, we needed to think about how we were going to look at Shakespeare's plays in that really seminal moment for us. And Greg, our artistic director, wanted to look at The Tempest, which is Shakespeare's last play, arguably one of his most magical plays. And in that play, there is a scene called a masque, and it's a spectacle. And in Shakespeare's day, it was spectacle of innovation. It was using the most cutting edge technologies. And he wanted the spirit of that to think about what a 21st century spectacle would look and feel like in our theatres. And I'm going to start, hopefully, on a Zoom platform, share with you a video that will give you a sense of what we did back in 2016 and how that has made us think about our audiences, where we are and when we sit physically, and that our global audiences that are in their homes or maybe not coming to Stratford-upon-Avon, and how we can find those connection points. It was a collaboration with Intel and the Imaginarium Studios, and for the first time ever, we put a real-time motion captured digital avatar on stage with live actors performing. And I'm going to show you a video of it now. and then talk you through what we did and what we found. Here we go. Let's try. Oh. And we're buffering, which I might come back to that then, if that's all right. In the world of buffering, I will come back to that, and I will share that at a different point when it's had time to catch up with itself. But let's go into the and tomorrow belongs to those who see it coming. And it's no, how can I put it? It's a wonderful, wonderful quote, because it's so hopeful, and it allows us to wrap around the way that artists think and how artists do innovate, and think about the present tense, but also think about where this work goes, and how at the RSC we're thinking about the past, the present and the future all the time. So this is our home. This is where, up till when the pandemic hit, 1,000 people came here every night to have a shared experience. And in that shared experience, we were telling stories, we were connected, we were live. And as we open back up, these are places where we have looked at stories of the day and shared them with each other. And in the spirit of that, looking at the actor is probably the best form of storytelling technology there is. And in those spaces and in those buildings, it's also important to say that they are immersive. We have people coming together from lots of different spaces, and it's that connectedness that we have in this space that compels us to not look at things as a singular experience, but think about them as a connected experience. This is Mark Courtley, and the video that I will show you during this presentation was played Ariel in The Tempest in 2016. And to give you some background, what The Tempest was doing was playing with new technologies that we were expanding into our theatre making toolkit. And we were looking at how could we get a digital avatar and look at that technology and think about how it could be used in theatre. And we were collaborating with Intel at the time, and someone from Intel said, do you know we have enough processing power to render a character in real time? And when we were in the room discussing that, it was really interesting, because we were like, what does that mean? What does that mean? And we talked about it again. And we went, oh, you mean puppetry, motion capture as puppetry. And that started a huge connection with us to explore how we could use game engine technology, the most powerful compute power that we could possibly do. And in this suit that Mark is wearing on stage are 27 gyroscopic sensors that you'd find in your mobile phone. And they are tracking all his body movements, taking that through a Wi-Fi network, putting that into a game engine. And then, as you'll see now, it becomes his digital avatar. And I think this is one of the scenes from the play that's really stunning and beautiful, because you can see Mark there. And we had massive moving projection surfaces. We had 27 projectors projecting all the way across the volume of the stage. And it meant that Mark could puppeteer his character and play those lines of the play that talked about when he was being naughty, when he was being angry. And here you see Simon Russell Beale as Prospero, trapping him in the cloven pine, and Mark being, as Ariel, being constricted by that within the cloven pine. And then after that scene, it just disappears. And that's what can happen when we collaborate with technology, or we find partners that don't think like us. We can allow those tools to come into our theatre making toolkit and use them to tell our stories and think differently. But we didn't want to just think about what was going on stage, we wanted to also think about the world of the play, the world we occupy, the world the play occupies, and not just think about the stage that you see and you're there at, but also the stage, all of the possible stages that you can connect with in real time with us around the world. And we wanted to make you feel like you were coming to Prospero's Island, that you were coming to the world of the play as you entered the building. And in that, it allowed us to think about some of the work we had done previously at the RSC, such Sweet Sorrow, and then Midsummer Night's Dreaming back in 2013, that played with the idea of storytelling platforms being social media or on your phone or online platforms, and they were spaces for us to tell stories. So we had 1,000 people come see the show every night. It sold out and it was beautiful. But we also had this space of connection outside of that. And how could we play with that? And how could we, if we were experimenting with technology on our stage, how could we think about the technology off our traditional stage and think about what other stages were there? So in the Tempest, what we also did was make a Snapchat filter. And in that Snapchat filter, you could play with Ariel, and Ariel lights your face. And it was a playful, creative moment in the run during 2016, where we were just making a discrete statement around the storytelling of it and the fracturedness of it, to go, how could we be playful using those forms that were pervasive in everyone's life, that people were scrolling through Facebook, Instagram, looking as a form of reading, scrolling through your phone. How could we disrupt that space, and how could we put playful, theatrical, meaningful content in that moment? And we created the Snapchat filter. We made it available in the UK, and over in 1 week only, we reached 7.5 million people. And if we think about that statistic and we think about the world that we occupy on our stages, it was a real profound moment for us to think, oh my goodness, how can we bring that together? How can we look at the future of theatre and bring these platforms together? And where can theatre be in these new spaces? And how can we make meaningful, delightful, thought-provoking experiences in these spaces, which are currently occupied in a much more throwaway medium and moment? How could we play with that? And in that resulted a project which was run by the UK government, the innovation strategy of the government, to look called Audience of the Future. And in that, it looked at, it put a call out for how could people explore the future of 4 strands: broadcast, visitor experiences, live performance, and gaming, using immersive technology. Because the world we're in is, we say we're immersed, but we've always been immersed in theatre. And that's a really fascinating thing for us to think about, is actually theatre has always been immersed. It's always had a relationship with technology. Candlelight was a technology. Electricity has been a technology that's changed form. Film has been a technology that has allowed us to think about the future. And as we look at mixed reality, augmented reality, the internet, if we look at the profound impact of the printing press that has allowed us to keep Shakespeare's plays alive and have been a repository of those stories, if we look at the internet as a form of distribution, as a form of democratization, as a form of globalization, then exploring the future of live performance becomes really interesting about connection. And I think right now, as we come out of the pandemic and we look at our homes and how we've connected, it's not a binary, it's either or. It's not a rejection of old and in with the new. What it's about is about bringing that together and connection, and finding those right places for our stories to connect with who is in those worlds and where they feel most comfortable. So we didn't want to do this on our own. We as the RSC had huge success with the Tempest. but we wanted to expand the concept of live performance and how we could explore that. And we invited our colleagues and peers from arts organisations that we really respected and admired, but looked at their practice differently, possibly shared similar audiences, but also were focusing on their skills and expertise. And so we had Punch Drunk, the Philharmonia Orchestra, Manchester International Festival, and a digital studio called Marshmallow Laser Feast. And in that, with our technology partners, we still wanted to look at the game engine technology to see what it could do. We've seen huge developments in world building and gaming and young coders and programmers and such like. And what new skills and what new talent can we think about bringing into the craft of making theatre? But one of the really lovely aspects of this collaboration was our research partners, how we could look at developing research practice at the same time and coexist and have a relationship with our university partners, University of Portsmouth, De Montfort, Goldsmiths, Nesta, to work with us synchronistically on some really important, crucial academic and research questions that we could work together on and positively impact. And that brought together a performance called Dream in this year, in March this year, which was a live online performance set in a midsummer forest. And I am going to try and attempt to share a video of that with you all now, and hopefully it will work okay. Half work okay. We're going to work on those videos at some point in this talk, but we will come back to them. Okay, let's go back to the presentation. Here we go. So Dream was a culmination of 2 years of research and development with these partners, and we all came together around a shared question around how could we use real-time technology, how could we think about performance in our physical spaces, and how could we think about performance in our virtual spaces. It's really interesting that the movement of that question, even over those 2 years and the disruption of the pandemic, absolutely accelerated many things that we were thinking about, but the pandemic completely pivoted our thinking towards a virtual audience and thinking about what I would call a transmedia environment, a multi-platform environment. And this performance was due to be performed in Stratford-upon-Avon in June 2020, and the pandemic hit, and the only thing we had of this production was the music performed by the Philharmonia Orchestra. And we had to completely reimagine this performance using cutting-edge immersive technology for audiences in their home. And that completely changed our approach. And also in that moment, when the pandemic hit, we had to stop production. And the first thing we had to do was speak to our research partners, reach out to audiences, and ask the question, how were audiences feeling? What did they want? Where were they at? How could we connect with them? And 3 compelling answers came back from that. The first one, that audiences were craving togetherness, they were craving liveness, but the third piece of information was there is a huge digital inequity in people's homes. And with that digital inequity in people's homes, we have to address that. And so when we're using these technologies, we have to really think about how we're using them, who has the technology available to them, where can it really go? And if we're thinking about an inclusive future, we need to think about how we make work that is for people and it's available to people with the technology that they have. So the key technologies that we used in Dream were real-time motion capture. We were using facial recognition technology. We were using game engine technology to make a world, but we were distributing not in any form of immersive headset. We were distributing it through mobile, tablet and desktop. But everything was created in real time. Everything was performed live. And we had a form of interactivity where people could interact with the performance. So what was different about this piece is that we weren't just broadcasting out a video, we were creating a world which performers performed in, and then people from around the world were able to interact through being able to guide Puck as a firefly and light their way in the performance. This was a 20-minute performance. It was based on the ideas of Midsummer Night's Dream, but it was completely new performance created for these technologies. This is the volume that we worked in. We were performing in the UK at some of the most challenging times around COVID, where the third lockdown happened for us. So we had to maintain a really safe distance. So the volume was kept really tight. And this is the performance space. And at the back, you can see a video LED screen, which was the world of the play, which was the play that people saw in their homes. So the actors had a really strong connection with what the audiences were experiencing and how they were performing with that. And they were constantly performing with each other and in the virtual world at the same time. We had an amazing movement director called Sarah Perry, and the cast also really came together. You'll see on the floor there's a grid, and this was a 7 meter by 7 meter volume, which we turned into a grid. But actually the actors were performing in a 7 kilometer by 7 kilometer virtual forest that they were traveling through. So we were playing with scale, but the world of the play was always present. This is one of the characters from the play. We took the spirit world of the performance, and that's what we played with. And what we wanted to do was look at the play A Midsummer Night's Dream with the world in crisis, and that we had to somehow, and the forest was upset, and we had to get through that. And all of the themes of the play, and Peas Blossom's character was made of the forest and an elemental, and the actor performing Peas Blossom was performing in a really physical, literal way with the character. But what's quite interesting with the characters in this virtual work is that they can be anything. And the puppetry of that we learned from The Tempest, we can play with that. And as you see in this picture, you're seeing Puck, the character of Puck, which is made up of rocks. But around Puck, these are these fireflies in the experience that light Puck up. And so there were key moments where the audience were asked to light Puck's way. And in that, using touch on your iPad or on your keyboard, you were able to throw your firefly into the volume, and it created a light path for Puck to move forward. On the other part of the screen is Lauren, and she's performing Mustard Seed. And as you can see there's an iPhone which is capturing her movements, which are then powering her character, which was the mycelial network of the forest. And again, we're using puppetry all the time, and it's an incredibly physical performance that people were experiencing. We were playing with scale as well. So we were playing with these huge characters in the forest, and then tiny characters such as Cobweb. And Cobweb is in an acorn cup and performed using motion capture technology. But this is Maggie, the character, and she's using different forms of physicality to perform that character, and nodding her head to move the eye, using her hands to close it, and then using different parts of her body to blink and react. And that's those are the things that we were finding out. And these are technologies that are used in healthcare and gaming, and these were the things that people were seeing on their screen. And this is Puck and moving around, and how performative and how physical these experiences were in the volume itself. But you can't think about these performances in isolation. And when we're also thinking about the future of theatre, if we're thinking about transmedia and sense of fractured narrative, this wasn't a 3-hour traditional performance on a stage. This was a 20-minute performance on different platforms in people's homes. And it was taking the themes of the play, it was fracturing the narrative, it was playing with narrative as an embodied experience rather than a linear experience. It was throwing up lots of different thoughts around form. And when you were looking at form, was this a game? Was this a film? Was this a piece of theatre? We're running through all of these projects, and that's bringing together people in the best of their game to experiment and collaborate. That we were finding something new, and we realised that actually you could have sat, if without COVID, you could have sat in that physical experience and had the most compelling experience possible. And virtually equally, you are having a beautiful experience in a different way. So we had to think about how we marketed this show, how we shared this show, how we thought about this show in completely different ways in terms of our audiences. And when we're thinking about this work nowadays, we can't think about it and talking about it in the same way that we would do a show on our stage. We've got to think about the welcome. We've got to think about the world you're coming into. And it's not enough to put out a YouTube link without all of the rituals that you have in theatre. And what's wonderful is theatre has so many amazing rituals and so many amazing ways of making you feel welcome, making you feel part of a shared experience, and making you feel like you are at an event. And there are things that over time we've come to take for granted, or we don't even know what we're doing. And we also don't recognize that those rituals have changed over centuries. And if we look at Shakespeare's time, we look at events at the Globe and showing up for performances wasn't just you rocked up to a show. Business was done, dining was done, flirting was done, politics was done, and the show as well. And these were events, these were spectacles where you were seen, where you observed, where, you know, the idea of going out, but there was a hubbub and an enjoyment and a socialness of those experiences that we still have today. But those rituals have changed over time. And they're rituals that are carefully curated and completely pervasive. And they're rituals that we don't necessarily think about, but are so crucial when we're thinking and developing and designing our work. And as we look at our work online, as we look at the fact that those rituals have broken down because we can't do the same thing if you're not coming to our building directly, we have to really think about how we can make those feelings possible when you connect with us remotely. And, you know, anyone that thinks that the lights going down in a theatre just before we start a show, or the mobile phone announcement just before you start a show, are things that just get you ready and prepared to be together. And when you are together, you're in sync and you're watching together. And it's a really important component when we look at our work going forward about how we make people feel those feelings that we have really organically in the traditional ways that we experience theatre. So in this project, we weren't just creating a show, we weren't just creating the content, we were creating the stage, we were creating the distribution. It's important to note that we achieved the first multi-platform real-time distribution, interactive distribution of a performance using live motion capture. That was delivered by an arts collaboration, not delivered by a technology company. And again, if we look at the Norbert Weiner quote, we need artists to become engineers and engineers to become artists. Because what it does is it allows us not to think about the more efficient use of platforms, but it helps us define the rules around those platforms, the ethics around those platforms, the rules and engagement, but also the welcome. And if we think about the opportunity that we have now as we emerge from the pandemic, how do we build towards a more inclusive future? how can we look at inclusive recovery that is transparent, that is non-hierarchical, that allows us stories to exist? Whose stories? Look at those politics and look at those ethics. Then we need to look at how we build our virtual buildings in the same way that we need to think about our pre-existing buildings, our traditional buildings, about how welcoming they are and how we make people feel comfortable coming to them. So we created this site called Dream, and it was a site not dissimilar to marketing sites for shows and things like that, but it was the site for the production, and it was the site where you were given information incrementally about your visit. And it also had FAQs about how you would enjoy the performance best, whether that was with headphones on. It talks about how long the performance was. It kind of, what we didn't want is people learning what the performance was while they were in it, knowing that lots of people would be experiencing this for the first time. But what we were wanting to do was to give you that information and share it, but also give some sense of anticipation to the event. And as you can see here, there's a ticker with how many days, how many hours and minutes were left. And I can assure you, when you're running that production, that's a very stressful thing to have, because your time is running out. But when you're the audience member, what we hope is that that's taking you on a journey to move forward. So that was the world that we were in, and that's what we started to think about. And in that, what we did was we created a lobby that you could come to and be part of the experience, and a bit like as you come to a show and you pick up your ticket from box office. So what we made was this audience experience timeline that just gave you all the key beats of how you were going to connect with us virtually and together, and know what you were experiencing. And also as well, test whether you wanted to be an interactive participant or whether you just wanted to sit back and relax and watch a show, to give you decision points in how you were entering this environment, and also for us to understand what connection, what togetherness, what liveness you were craving. And the other thing is that we tested all your technology before you came to the events, and so it would let you know what the best experience was for you and how you can make that happen. So all of that happened in advance. And I think when we look at the future of theatre and we look at transmedia, that key moment that we wrap ourselves around, we have the world of the play to play with, and the actually persistent narrative, a narrative that you can come back to, but the world building of performance, the world building that kids are doing all the time, whether that's Minecraft or whether that's Fortnite. It may not be the content that we find stimulating, but there's something about this generation coming through that are making the content that are in the world, are present in a world that is virtual. And how do we think about those things? So we looked at ritual again, looked at how we could take you through that experience. And also at the end of every performance, we always had a Q&A, and you could always come and have a drink with us at the virtual bar to have a chat about the show. And just as simple as that moment of when you go down the pub after a show and have a chat, and the actors might be in there too. So that's what we were really playing with here and experimenting with. And I think the audience aspect was absolutely fascinating, about how they connected, how they engaged, and how we think about content moving forward, not necessarily being linear, but also that audiences are present with us and are vocal, and are more vocal than they would be necessarily when they're experiencing our work in the person. So we had this lobby, and the lobby was like your front of house in a building, and it was a bit like that's where you waited for the show, and that's where people turned up. And you'll see, if you look at the bottom tweet in the middle, it says audience and 5,130 people. And I'm telling you, that was so fascinating. This was one of the most simple technological feats of the entire project. We were using ridiculously complex design systems to make it. Yet for audiences, the fact that that number went up when you were joining, people joined an hour before, half an hour before, and people were sharing going, I'm part of this. I'm seeing this show in this moment with 5,000 people. I'm so excited. I feel connected. I've got my seat. I'm here for my virtual exploration through a midsummer forest. I have that anticipation. All of those rituals around theatre. One of the observations here is we don't, as makers, have to cultivate all of those rituals anymore. The audience in the creator economy, in the Generation Y, Z world that we're in, and the fact that we make our social media, we upload information, we're making our content. Audiences are enabled, they're live, and they can make these rituals for us and with us. And that was a really big learn, is that we don't have to do everything for our audiences. When we're thinking virtual connections and online, we're doing it with our audiences as much as we do it with our audiences live, but it's a really interesting, empowered space for our audiences to occupy and something for us to take away. The other wonderful thing here is that we were reaching people from all different parts of the world. We programmed differently. We had a 2 a.m. UK performance that hit West Coast and Asia Pacific, which had a completely different vibe. We had schools joining. We had people joining on their mobile phones. We had people, families joining. And when you entered that world, you could come to this lobby and you were welcomed. And it was a really important moment when people came together. They had the equivalent of the mobile phone signal, and then suddenly the lights went out and you were in the performance. And I think that beat for us about how, when we are so distracted and we have very little control over how we occupy attention of audiences and people's homes or wherever they are, it's really important that we think about how we bring them into the world so they enjoy it. And we are now dealing with homes as cultural spaces. If anything, the pandemic has shown us the ingenuity, not just of our practitioners and our theatre makers, but of our audiences making their homes cultural spaces where they are not only receiving content, they are participating in content, they are engaged in content, they are together in their content, they will be interactive, and they are making social statements and social declarations of interconnectivity with us and each other. And they are watching it in their spaces in their way. They are making it events. We shared VIP boxes where we sent cocktails to audiences that they opened up together. And what we realise is that actually the really profound, important thing is that people need to feel that they're doing this together at the same time. And we can create that connection. And people know that they're doing it together at the same time and who they're doing it with. So these were some of the most wonderful images to see and look at, is how when we were experiencing Dream, our audiences were feeding back to us and sharing with everybody where they were, who they were. And if we look at what's behind me now, it was like the equivalent of everyone sitting in a room together. But we have a long way to go there. There's more connection that we can make. As much as we were having audiences connected through social media, we were still the main operation in that. We were still the main people sharing that information. And I think going forward, what I would love is to look at a way that audiences can connect just themselves with each other, like people on their WhatsApp groups. But if you come in as an individual, that actually it's a social space for you where you can connect with others online and feel really welcome and not alone in how you're experiencing the theatre with us. And I think that it's through that guise that I think the next steps for us are about how we look at the welcome, how we think about audience connection and participation and the nuance of that. And to give you some statistics, this performance was 10 performances in March this year. In that, we had 65,000 audiences come visit us in this space, paying audiences and testing the commercialization of that. We have, of those 65,000 audience members, that covered 92 countries. And within that, we had 76% of those 65,000 people were new bookers to the RSC, people we never met before. Of that, 40% of those were Generation Y and Z, younger audiences, and younger audiences connecting with our traditional older audiences, intergenerational audiences. And what was really fascinating to watch is our older audiences coming in with the Shakespeare and coming out with the technology, and our younger audiences coming in with the technology and out with the Shakespeare. And if you think about the challenges around polarization now, the connection points with our young people and the worlds that they occupy, a lot of this experience was very natural and very connected. But what we were able to do in a really fractured, polarized time is bring families together, wrap themselves around an experience, but have cultural pathways to that everyone connected with, whether that was a traditional ritual around performance or whether that was a new form of interactivity. And as we move forward and we think about theatre and we think about how we present it, what we're doing, what theatre does, and its brilliant opportunity, is that it can place space for debate around the big challenges that we are experiencing. And some of that is the inequity of what we where we are, and how we look at inclusivity, but how we bring what is a really exciting moment in the world, that in the generation we're in, is that we will be the generation who have a workforce or people that grew up pre-internet, and then a workforce that have grown up only knowing the internet. And we have this moment where we can learn off each other and also influence each other and provide connection rather than a polarization. And all of this comes with the spirit of collaboration. All of this is about bringing together not just different people, different industries. If we just did it as the RSC and didn't collaborate, I don't think it would allow us to experiment and innovate, and to welcome people to Stratford-upon-Avon, to get them to experience the craft of theatre, the fact that we have a costume workshop and we have millinery and we make our own armour and our swords and our costumes and our craft, but bringing in and welcoming people with new crafts that we can bring into theatre, whether that's coders and programmers, whether that's 3D artists, whether that's game engine specialists or motion capture specialists, that come from a world where Shakespeare has such a pervasive understanding, where 50% of the world's population learn Shakespeare. How can we use that as a way to integrate and move forward? And in that, those collaborations being flat, recognizing that academic rigor is not something at the beginning and an end of an experience where we learn and inform ourselves, but collaborating with researchers and academics together. And when we pivoted Dream to a virtual performance, it was when we went to our research partners for us to listen, for them to share their expertise and talk about where audiences were at, and for us to get data and evidence to have a conversation. And it was in that we made a more confident piece, but not only that, we took more risk and applied more ingenuity, and were able to bring people from different backgrounds together. And to do that, we had to celebrate and recognize the expertise of the collaboration and who we were working with, and know our strengths. We had to shift our culture. We had to accept risk. Whilst we flattened hierarchies, it gave time for people to think equitably. We had to give ourselves the time and understand that we needed to experiment within that. And through that, what I hope we're doing is developing the future leaders in our world, and the future leaders that will take the stories of Shakespeare that are relevant to us now, that were relevant to us 400 years ago, and give them the mandate and the permission and the enthusiasm to look at those stories in a new way. Because Romeo and Juliet is about a boy and a girl that just want to get it on and are failed by their families. Hamlet loses his father and seeks revenge. The history plays are about power, influence, control, politics, everything that we have in our world now. But it's how we see that through the lens of now is really important. But on the hard edge, hard line of this, what's really important for us to do, particularly as we are in a world where we need to think commercially and we need to build back after a really challenging time, is we have to measure that innovation. We have to think about what the commercial models are. We have to think about the distribution and the infrastructure and how we think about narrative being on multi-platforms and where we can, what the value and the purpose of those, because to look at theatres and cinemas and the cultural spaces that we occupy, the internet as a cultural space, virtual worlds as cultural spaces, we need to think about how we create long-term measures to make them sustainable, exciting, viable, inclusive. And so as much as we innovate our craft, we have to make sure that we're innovating forms that can provide a future commercial, successful financial model for us. And I think on that note, I will pause for a moment, if that's all right, and draw breath, try and look at my videos that I would love to share with you and potentially take some questions from you and stop sharing. Thank you.
I'm here with you, Sarah, just seeing how the videos will go.
Yeah, no, thank you. I'm going to take a look at them, but I can take some questions while we take a look at I look into the videos if you like.
I have a question which was really with me throughout the talk. You spoke so beautifully about that democratization that digital theatre allows of the theatre. And I was wondering, to what extent do you think that democratization of the audience, of an encounter of Shakespeare, you know, as a cultural concept, how can that lead further to perhaps to democratization of that idea of Shakespearean performer and actor? And I think you started pointing to that throughout the talk, but I would love to hear more. And in the meantime, dear audience, please feel free to post questions to the Q&A tool to explore these magical, rich, and fantastic examples that Sarah has shared.
Yeah, one of the examples I was hoping to share, which I'll take a look at, which is that and curated, and that the democratized means that we enter their world, an audience's world. Therefore, it's the equivalent of, do we take our shoes off? You know, how do we go into those spaces respectfully, kindly, curiously? And it is slightly different for the broadcast medium, because we want to interact and have a sense of liveness and togetherness, which is what theatre's about. So when I talk about democratization, I think it's a bit about that, and it's a bit about the agency that an audience have now about how they experience the work with us, where they want to be with us. I also see huge opportunity in that, because, you know, if you can't, Stratford-upon-Avon is not an easy place to get to, and particularly now with the privilege of travel and all of that. We also can globally program. We have a global editorial perspective, and we can potentially make connections and relationships with people that we would never have ordinarily connected with, or it could have been challenging to do so. And I think if we look at the themes such as relevance and where is our relevance in the world at this time, that those are really interesting questions from an artist's perspective, but also very much from the audiences.
Thank you. And speaking about an artist, there is a question from Monica Segos. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your name right. From this experience, do you see that an individual artist could scale a project like this without the access to the groundbreaking technology?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And if we're talking about inclusivity, if we're talking about accessibility and talking about audiences accessibility, you're quite right. What about independent artists and all of that? I think in full frankness, I think some of those technologies are prohibitive, and we have to hold that as a really honest debate and conversation. But what we can do as institutions is make those, work with the infrastructures that we have available to us and make that more democratic and share that more, whether that's sharing our expertise, whether sometimes that's sharing our technology, whether that's sharing opportunity. What we found really helpful is that we worked with our research partners were also practice-led. So the University of Portsmouth had all of that technology that we're talking about. Even now, it would be prohibitive for the RSC to use some of that technology in a commercially set up way. So from an artist perspective, I think being able to connect with universities who have that technology and require real world applications of that technology to research and test ideas is one of the more inclusive ways of being able to test and use those technologies. And the other thing as an artist is the commercial frameworks for that technology just don't suit an artistic practice. You're paying by the day, you're going in and you're implementing something. But as an artist, if you're having to think about how do I perform and think about virtual connection and in-person connection at the same time, that's going to take a process, and that's going to take an unlearning of certain skills and a relearning of others. So you're really right to bring it up. We should be bringing up all the time, and we should be finding, we should be sharing and brokering where we know access to resources. And we hugely benefited from the relationship we had with the University of Portsmouth, who had much of that technology in their building, and we went to them. So we performed this performance from Portsmouth.
Thank you. And there are questions now flying in. The next one is from anonymous attendee, and it is very appropriate for the Tempest, I think, and both Midsummer Night's Dream. Who is the mastermind behind the digital production? Do you see a totally different way of producing theater after it moves virtual?
Oh gosh. Well, I don't think there's one particular mastermind of digital production, but it's definitely a new set of skills and a new set of talent coming in. And we found that when we put the dream together, we were hiring people that had massive experience in streaming, broadcast events, that people who had game engine technology experience, and that had also traditional theatrical automation, lighting and sound experience, so that we were using theatre technology within that, and it all came together. So there was no one mastermind, but you had a lot of people on top of their game going, okay, well, I do my thing really well, so whether I do my streaming, great, but what's really interesting to me about this is I can sort of play with my practice a bit, and I can think about it differently. So it's an emergent thing, and I should note that we are launching a website where we're sharing all our learnings, and one of them is the design schematic of roles and responsibilities for this work, and the design schematic of the tech pipeline, and that's all to share our learnings and be really transparent and open, and also to share the mistakes so other people don't have to. So yeah, it's and also we had a camera person who was a performer, so you weren't, the camera was we had a camera in world that was capturing it, and it wasn't quite a traditional sort of like sit back camera operated thing. It's very geeky, but that website, which we can share afterwards, we can share with this group, if you know what I mean, which has like 20 panels and sessions from like your PR people, legal as well, IP, legal, all of those setups, also, as I say, technical, and also the creative development too. So we're sharing a lot of that as well.
I love the intersection, and I'm sure, you know, the website, that's very generous, and it will be a great resource also for students in universities. There are some warm words in response to your lecture and your questions in the Q&A. So the next question is raising that issue of, you know, the eternal content form a question, I guess, when we talk about Shakespeare or verse drama in general. How much do you let the technology drive content versus the content driving the technology?
Really good question. I think it's always the idea that pushes the technology. I think this was quite a technology heavy project. Just to be really clear, the purpose of the project was technology led. So it was probably the nearest we got as a company to that balance, and its purpose was researching and developing using new technologies. So there was a clear purpose there around that. But I think that as artists, as theatre companies, we're always about the promise of theatre and how those technologies enable that. So it's definitely using technology as an enabler. But I think that when you're researching and developing, you, not in the production sense, but in the private space around that, you really do need to push that quite a lot. And I think that what artists do brilliantly are brilliant skeptics around technology. And I don't mean that in a negative way. I mean that as in why. Why does this push the story forward? What does this do for the storytelling? Why do I need to use this instead of some sellotape and some cardboard? What does this do? How does this connect? And also the other thing is that the contract between the artist and the audience, we had so many conversations. If that technology fails, you have broken your contract with the audience. So we can't infantilize that technology that may not be production ready, that may not be quite there yet. We have to think about always giving our audiences the best experience possible, because that's the contract we make with them when they come with us. And also for an artist as well, is to not infantilize, but actually that all of that is about enabling that storyteller to be able to share their work with, for now. The premise of that is that as we expand the theatre making toolkit, we hope to give artists, practitioners more choice. And that's the interesting thing about it, I think.
Thank you. So you spoke about how your work is performed by research, and the next question is putting it from the other perspective. After all these revolutionary changes in media and performance, do you think that research on theatre should change as well? How does research develop to keep in touch with these changes?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's lots of different types of research, lots of different types of academic collaboration. I have had nothing but good from collaboration with academics. I create a really open environment for that, and we don't. I think it's really interesting that we, I think, all occupy in silos. So it's like, I think that I hope that the impact for research is it becomes less siloed. So it's not like one aspect, but we can work with multiple research partners according to their specialism and what they can share with us. About how we can drive that forward. What we're less good at as creative practitioners, we're less good at this, is the impact reports and how that impacts on future research. And it's not present in our mind. And I think as we move forward, we are always thinking about the production or the product. We're not necessarily thinking about the outcomes and the published outcomes of the research and how long sometimes that takes. So we will have done a production, but the research could be going on for the next 7 years. Like the long tail of the research is super important and what that's part of. We're not always thinking about that in terms of the creative practice. So there's an element of that. And also, I think real world applications of research. allowing opportunities for researchers to come in and have real world testing scenarios of a lot of what I would call academic questions. And I think that's a really positive, practice-led, human-centered led approaches that can allow us to iterate. And I think that as much as form and creative practice is fracturing and re-establishing, I'm sure that's happening in academic ways, but I don't have the expertise on that, but I'd like to think that. Ooh.
I want to follow up this question, wondering how has everything that you have said and those changes that you've commenting on, that changes to the audience, approaches to the audience and theater and space, how can that inform what we used to know as, I guess, live theater in space, in theater space?
So, also, sorry, can I have the question again? Sorry.
Yes.
So gives me more time to answer it.
Sorry, I will rephrase that. So that technological development, and how has that changed your thinking as a company, or thinking in general about audience, about thinking globally, involving international audiences, making it more democratic? How can that inspire changes within the practice that we used to know as conventional practice, if you like, in conventional spaces, in life? And I'm using the because obviously it has changed our thinking about life.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the sense of liveness is a really, really fascinating as we look at virtual connection and what that means. I do think it's not a binary issue, and it's certainly not a we're not interested in conventional practice. That's not true at all, and it hold firm. What's interesting is, I think, that it turns the conventional performance into something quite intimate, of being called the ritual of that. And then on top of that, with the virtual experience, we are able to think about what we commission and create as not necessarily being, as I say, a 3-hour play. But if you look at Instagram, that's storytelling. People are visually storytelling, and that's a form of reading. If you look at Minecraft, there is world building. What's interesting, I've observed with kids on something like that, is that they will create a virtual world, and then in the playground together in real time, in the real world, will reenact that. And I find that really fascinating, how what we're seeing is an acceptance of virtual and real worlds coexisting, and we're very comfortable flipping in and out of them going forward. But if I can give you something, it's about how you find meaningful, how you start caring about a virtual character, or how you start caring about those stories that are being told, which is really important. It's not just a shiny technology that goes, great, we're here. Our job as storytellers is to give empathy, it's to give the meaning, it's to be an emotional carrier of some big ideas, or some really intimate thoughts that make us reflect upon the world. And I think if we look at what I would call popularism in a lot of these new and emergent spaces, what we're doing that through arts and culture is challenging the popularism, thinking about, if you look at who you follow on social media, will often be people that you like, or people that you have similar political views with. And as you've come into these spaces over centuries, that's not what happens. It's about politics, it's about socialness, it's about people from different places, different political views sometimes coming together and watching something together in front of each other and forming opinions, or having those opinions changed. That's really important as we think about this work, the emotional integrity of that and the quality of that, which is why the ritual aspect is really important as well.
Thank you so much. Would you like to share videos at the end, or?
I don't think they're working. I think my internet connection is really poor. What I would love to do is, if I can send links of the videos to you to share. But I would hate to end on a technology fail. That would feel like a deep irony in my job and what we've just talked about. So if it's all right,
I think you've shared so much rich material that you know, we've been really we appreciate your generosity, and there has been so much richness. And thank you so much for the stimulating talk. Thank you to the audience for joining at today a Transmedia Arts Seminar. Thank you to MetaLab and Mahindra Humanities Center, Harvard University, for making it happen. Have a good night, everyone. Thank you.